Welcome to the deep dive. So our mission here is always to take that stack of sources you give
All
us
right.
and really just, cut through the noise.
Deliver the clearest view.
Exactly. And today we are diving into one single, really paradoxical year, 1925.
Often called the zenith of the Roaring Twenties.
I guess.
That's only half the story.
It really is, because the sources, they show it was also a crucible, a year of just intense pressure.
I like to think of it as a glittering gala held directly on a major fault line.
That's a great way to put it.
You had all this incredible optimism, this artistic flourishing, but right underneath, these deep social and political cracks were forming, fissures that, define American life even now.
Exactly. We're not just looking at a date on a calendar. We're looking at the birth of so many modern American conflicts.
Mhm.
So we're going to unpack these clashes. The big one between science and faith, the Scopes trial. We'll get into the incredible excess of speculation and crime.
The Florida land boom, Al Capone.
Yes. And then a totally different kind of conflict. This amazing story of new tech versus raw animal endurance, the Nome Serum Run.
And by the time we're done, you'll see how understanding 1925 is really about understanding where our own cycles of culture wars and, frankly, our risky financial systems first got started. Let's dig in.
Okay, so let's start with maybe the loudest clash of that year. The Scopes monkey trial.
The Great American Culture War, round one.
Right. And what the notes show is that this wasn't just some straightforward legal case. It was a deliberate media spectacle, kicked off in Dayton, Tennessee, July 10, 1925.
It's the ultimate example of a publicity stunt that becomes history. The whole thing was engineered.
How so?
Well, you had the ACLU, the American Civil Liberties Union, and they put out this offer to fund a test case to challenge a new state law.
The Butler Act.
The Butler Act, exactly, which made it illegal to teach human evolution in public schools.
And what's wild is that the local leaders in Dayton, they just jumped on it.
They did. They didn't see it as a threat. They saw it as a huge opportunity for free national publicity,
Yeah.
a way to literally put their small town on the map.
So the defendant, John T. Scopes, he was just a pawn in this.
Pretty much. He was only 24, a high school science teacher, and he wasn't even entirely sure he had taught evolution.
Really?
Yeah, but he willingly incriminated himself. He said he did, just so the whole show could go forward.
Wow. And it became a show. I mean, this was the first trial broadcast live on national radio.
It was. And that turned what was technically a minor misdemeanor, the penalty was just a $100 fine, into this explosive national duel over ideas.
And the duelists, I mean, you couldn't have cast it better.
No.
For the defense, you have Clarence Darrow, the most famous agnostic lawyer in the country. He's there to expose the whole thing as, absurd.
Right. And against him, William Jennings Bryan, a political and religious superstar, a three-time presidential candidate.
The voice of fundamentalism.
Absolutely. Bryan truly believed that evolution undermined the very fabric of American virtue and morality.
So having these two huge polarizing figures, how did that change the trial itself?
It completely transformed it. The courtroom became this mix of a revival tent and a theater. Whether Scopes was guilty or not, that became almost irrelevant. It was all about the performance.
And the heat, the crowds.
Oh, it was oppressive. Over 90 degrees.
Bro.
Hundreds of reporters cramming into this small town, sending out every detail to the nation.
Okay, so here's where it gets really good. The climax of the trial.
It's pure legal theater.
Darrow does something completely unorthodox. He calls the prosecutor, Bryan, to the stand as an expert witness.
An expert on the Bible.
And he just grills him right there in front of everyone.
A relentless cross-examination. Darrow's asking him about the literal truth of the Old Testament. Did Jonah live inside a whale? Where did Cain get his wife?
How did Bryan handle that?
He held his ground at first. But under all that pressure, he eventually conceded that, well, maybe some parts of the Bible, like the 6 days of creation, could be interpreted metaphorically.
And the media, listening on the radio, they just pounced on that.
Instantly. They framed it as fundamentalism cracking under the pressure of modern logic. So even though Bryan won the case,
Right. Scopes was convicted. It took the jury, 9 minutes?
it is 9 minutes, but the press narrative was that Bryan had lost the bigger cultural war.
So what was the final outcome? It sounds messy.
It was very messy, which is classic 1925. The conviction got overturned on a technicality, so Scopes never paid the $100 fine. But, and this is crucial, the Butler Act itself, the law was upheld. It stayed on the books for decades.
And we have to place this in the wider context of the time, because while this battle was raging, there was this other, much darker social current.
A deeply anxious and nativist one. The sources point out that in 1925, the Ku Klux Klan reached the absolute peak of its power and influence.
Marching 50,000 hooded members right down Pennsylvania Avenue in Washington, D.C.
That's the chilling connection. The Klan's power and the anti-evolution law were both fueled by the same fear. A fear of modernity, of immigration, of losing some perceived traditional American identity. It just shows how deep that anxiety ran, right beneath the glitter of the Jazz Age. So if the culture war was about what people believed, the next big clash in 1925 was all about what they chased.
Money. Pure speculative money.
And that chase was really supercharged by the man in the White House, President Calvin Coolidge.
Definitely. His inauguration on March 4th, 1925, it basically set the tone for the whole era. His philosophy was simple.
The business of America is business.
That's the one. He believed in deregulation, tax cuts, basically just letting the financial markets do their thing. And that created the perfect environment for excess.
And there is no better example of excess than the Florida land boom.
Oh, the nation's first real estate bubble. It peaked in a spectacular way in 1925.
And this wasn't just development, right? It was a national mania. It was a frenzy. And understanding how it worked is key to understanding the crash of '29. People weren't buying land to build homes. They were buying and flipping paper deeds, often for land they'd never even seen.
They were called binder boys.
That's right. Young brokers who'd put a small down payment, a binder, on a piece of land and then immediately resell the contract, sometimes for double or triple the price in a single day.
Just creating fortunes out of thin air. But here's the crazy connection back to our last segment. Our sources point out a very ironic figure who was brought in to help sell all this land.
It's almost too perfect, isn't it?
It's William Jennings Bryan.
The very same man, the champion of piety from the Scopes trial. He was hired by a developer, George Merrick, to give Bible lessons at the Venetian Pool in Coral Gables.
So he was mixing religion and real estate.
He was using his fundamentalist credibility to attract buyers from the North. It's the perfect cynical microcosm of 1925.
That is just unbelievable. And the sources say the whole boom was built on systemic fraud. How did that actually work?
It was simple, really. The banks were the enablers. You had chains like the Manly Anthony banks using regular people's savings deposits.
My savings, your savings.
Exactly. And they were making these super high-risk insider loans to developers they were in bed with, all while state regulators either looked the other way or were maybe even in on the scheme. It was a giant house of cards.
A clear warning sign that everyone just ignored.
Completely.
So while that was happening in Florida, Prohibition was creating another kind of empire entirely.
Organized crime.
And in 1925, a 26-year-old Al Capone becomes the undisputed boss of his crime syndicate in Chicago.
Capone was a ruthless CEO. He ran bootlegging, gambling, prostitution.
Yeah.
He was essentially running a parallel government in Chicago. He had that famous quote.
Prohibition is a joke. All I do is to supply a public demand.
Right. And he was basically untouchable.
So wait, the Bureau of Investigation, which was the early FBI, they couldn't get him. Why not?
They just didn't have jurisdiction. Their focus was on federal crimes, like kidnapping across state lines, local stuff like gang murders and bootlegging. That was for the Chicago PD, who were often
On his payroll.
deeply compromised, yes. So he was insulated. That's why they had to get him on tax evasion years later. It's the only thing they could pin on him.
Okay, so you've got this explosion of wealth, corruption, crime. But 1925 also gives us the era's greatest critique of itself.
The artistic counter-narrative.
F. Scott Fitzgerald publishes The Great Gatsby.
The definitive, tragic portrait of the Jazz Age. It's a direct attack on that hollow ambition, the materialism, the moral vacuum that came with all that new money. Fitzgerald was questioning the very idea of an American dream built on nothing but flash.
And in just a stunning contrast to that critique of white excess, 1925 was also a peak for Black artistic expression.
Oh, a huge year. The Harlem Renaissance, or the New Negro Renaissance as it was called, was in full bloom.
What were some of the milestones?
Well, you had Alain Locke publishing his landmark anthology, The New Negro, which kind of defined the movement's vision. A young Langston Hughes won his first major prize for his poem, The Weary Blues.
A whole new voice.
A powerful new voice. And, maybe most importantly, Louis Armstrong made his first recordings with his band, The Hot Fives. He completely changed the path of jazz right there.
So you get the height of speculation and the deepest artistic challenge to it, all in the same year. That's a crucible. All right, let's shift from those spiritual and financial battles to a story of just pure physical survival, a race against time that really shows the limits of 1925 technology.
The Nome Serum Run.
This is happening in the dead of winter, early 1925 in Alaska.
And the town of Nome, which is totally isolated, is facing a diphtheria epidemic. It's moving fast, threatening about 10,000 people, especially the native and child populations.
And the crisis hits suddenly. The town doctor, Curtis Welch, realizes their entire supply of antitoxin has expired.
Right. The nearest replacement is 1,000 miles away in Anchorage, and the town is completely locked in by ice. The only way in or out is the 938-mile Iditarod Trail.
So officials have this urgent debate. Can we use modern tech? Can we fly the serum in?
The technology check fails. It fails spectacularly.
Why? I mean, planes existed.
They did, but they were basically vintage biplanes, open cockpits, very little instrumentation. The officials decided they were completely unreliable for the extreme conditions.
What were the conditions?
Temperatures down to minus 50 degrees Fahrenheit, whiteout blizzards, and the polar night, so almost total darkness. The risk of the plane crashing or the serum just freezing solid was way too high.
So they turned to the oldest technology they had.
The dog sled. And that kicks off the Great Race of Mercy. There's a relay of 20 mushers and about 150 dogs. They carry this serum 674 miles in just 5.5 days.
Facing wind chills estimated down to minus 85. Just incredible.
It's an unbelievable feat of endurance.
And this race creates two canine legends, but it also sparks a media controversy that tells us a lot about how we pick our heroes.
Okay, so let's talk about the two lead dogs. First, there's Togo.
Right,
He was the lead dog for Leonhard Seppala's team.
right.
Togo ran the longest and by far the most dangerous leg of the entire relay,
How far?
a staggering 261 miles.
Mm-hmm.
That included a terrifying crossing over the breaking ice of Norton Sound in the middle of a blizzard. Seppala later called him the best dog that ever traveled the Alaska Trail.
But he's not the dog everyone knows.
No, the dog the world knows is Balto.
Balto ran the final 55-mile leg into Nome, and he becomes this instant national celebrity. He gets a statue in Central Park. He tours the country.
And here's the contradiction the sources point out. Balto's fame was largely a media creation.
Oh, so?
Well, Seppala, who actually owned Balto, reportedly called him a scrub freight dog who was never in a winning team.
Ouch.
Yeah. Balto got famous because he was the one who crossed the finish line in front of the cameras.
And the analysis even suggests that his musher, Glennar Kazan, might have intentionally pushed on through that final leg instead of handing off to the next team, maybe to seize that moment of glory.
It's possible. And the biggest irony of all, the dog sled saves the day because the new technology failed. But the success of the relay directly leads to the Air Mail Act of 1925.
Which encouraged commercial aviation.
Exactly. So the very event that proved the reliability of the dog sled ended up speeding up its replacement by the airplane.
So as America is completely wrapped up in these internal battles, Scopes, Capone, the Florida boom, we should just briefly look at the wider world in 1925.
Right, because while President Coolidge was celebrating American business, Europe was being reshaped in some very radical, very alarming ways.
And the U.S. was largely just not paying attention.
For the most part, no.
So what were those key signals that were being missed?
There are two huge ones. First, in Italy. On January 3rd, 1925, Benito Mussolini gives a speech where he basically declares himself dictator. He's cementing the power he'd been building by just dismantling all the democratic institutions.
And then in Germany.
On July 18th, 1925, Adolf Hitler publishes the first volume of his book, Mein Kampf.
Which our sources call a blueprint of his agenda for a Third Reich.
It's all right there in print. And even though it didn't sell very well at first, fewer than 10,000 copies that first year. It was a public declaration of his intent.
So despite these clear, rising totalitarian threats, U.S. policy was just committed to isolationism.
Absolutely. We wanted to avoid any formal alliances, any political entanglements, but we were more than happy to let American businesses and banks keep expanding their investments overseas. We wanted the profit, just none of the responsibility.
So when you pull it all together, 1925 was this incredible collision point. It's the year new media radio figures out how to turn a local fight into a national culture war, broadcasting these ancient battles over science and faith to the whole country.
It was a year of just soaring wealth and incredible culture. The Florida boom, the Great Gatsby, the sound of Louis Armstrong. But it was all built on a foundation of, systemic fraud and deep social divides that were bound to crack.
In that amazing story from Nome, the Serum Run, It's a reminder that in a year obsessed with new tech and speculation, sometimes it's the oldest thing, raw animal and human endurance. That's the only thing you can rely on when the sophisticated systems fail.
And here's a final thought for you to take away, and it comes directly from that gnome story. Balto gets the statue in Central Park. He becomes famous for running the flashy final 55 miles, the part the media saw.
Right.
But Togo did the truly critical work, the 261 brutal miles across breaking ice. So the question for you is, when we celebrate heroes and breakthroughs in our own time, today, are we focusing on that flashy, final, camera-ready moment? Or are we remembering to honor the long, difficult, essential labor that actually made the victory possible? Something to think about as you watch the headlines.